What if the biggest problem in your marriage has nothing to do with communication skills? Has nothing to do with communication, effort, or even how much you love one another. For the past 19 years, I've had the privilege and honor to sit across from marriages who had tried everything. They went to therapy, they read the books, they went to the conferences, they renewed their vows. They prayed for something to change, and yet nothing moved the needle. They weren't failing because they didn't care. They weren't failing because they weren't trying. They were failing because they were fighting the wrong battle. And today we are going to look at what is the battle and how do we put attention and focus on fighting what is blocking the connection we so richly desire and need. I want to ask you 6 questions. For each statement, acknowledge whether or not that is true or false given your situation. Your answers will reveal whether or not we've been approaching our marriage from a foundation that can support the lasting change that we desire, or from a place that has been working against us. Let's begin. True or false? The key to fixing a struggling marriage is learning better communication skills. That is false. Communication skills are necessary and needed. They are the vehicle that drives connection. We believe they are downstream from the real issue. When emotional pain goes unprocessed, your nervous system gets triggered and stays in protective mode. No communication skill can override that type of biological response. You can learn every communication framework: validation, empathizing, active listening. But if your heart is guarded, the words cannot land because capacity precedes communication. True or false? If you tried counseling before and it didn't work, your marriage may simply be beyond repair. That's false. Most counseling focuses on behaviors, surface level behaviors, teaching things like fighting fair and scheduling date nights. Both great things. However, if we don't go after the real root, then no strategy has the capacity to stick. We want to approach from a new foundation because our past failures and the approaches that we've tried doesn't predict the future results when we change the approach. True or false? Your spouse needs to be fully committed and engaged for any real progress to happen. That's false. While we need both spouses to be a part of the process, and both spouses will eventually be needed to engage, transformation typically begins with one person. When one person decides, I'm going to lean in, not wait for anybody else, and get stronger by addressing your own pain, your own patterns, and your own responses, it creates the space that the relationship needs. Because changed people change atmospheres. True or false? Emotional disconnection in marriage is primarily caused by unresolved pain, not a lack of love or effort. Most disconnected couples love each other deeply. It's not because they don't care. It's not because they're lazy or they're even faithless. They're carrying pain in their minds. And because of that, their bodies have learned to protect them. And that protection creates the very distance that they hate. Because healing the pain restores the capacity for connection. True or false? If you've been married for many years and patterns are deeply ingrained, meaningful change becomes nearly impossible. That is false. Our brains and our nervous system retain the ability to form new pathways regardless of how long patterns have been in place. If you're constantly walking through the path of your grass and you see how that path is worn down, if we'll stop walking through that path and take a different way, the grass can repopulate. The same is true for us and our relationships. I've worked with couples married for 20, 30, and even 40 years who have experienced breakthrough when they addressed the real root. You see, time doesn't cement dysfunction. It just means the pain has been waiting longer to be healed. True or false? Real marriage transformation requires addressing the emotional, relational, and spiritual dimensions all together. That is true. Purely clinical approaches often can fall short for people that are faith-driven. And purely spiritual approaches sometimes bypass the real clinical work. However, if we integrate them, all three working together, creating a lasting change, now as a result of that, we have an integrated process moving forward. So here's what this quiz reveals, is that most couples are working incredibly hard. They're working incredibly hard on the wrong things. They're trying to communicate better when the real issue is not communication. It's unhealed pain. They're waiting on their spouse when they could actually start their own healing journey by leaning in and choosing themselves today. They're assuming past failure actually means permanent failure. So I want you to know I have two agendas. Agenda one, I want to give you the clearest understanding of why your marriage feels stuck. What is impacting the connection and actually create opportunities for lasting change. I want to give you the clearest understanding of why your marriage feels stuck and what actually creates lasting change, completely free for the opportunity of what this webinar can do for you and your spouse. Agenda two, I want to present you with an invitation to work with me. Agenda two, I want to present you with an invitation to work together through what I call a 30,000-foot view of clarity consultation. Now, my commitment to you is if for whatever reason I do not deliver on agenda one, if you do not walk away with a genuine clarity about what's been blocking your marriage, but what to do with it, then I'm going to ask you to completely ignore agenda two. I'm not here to sell you on something that you don't feel like you need. I'm here to show you what can be possible when we address the real root of disconnection to establish connection between you and your spouse. So what we're going to cover is 3 principles, 3 secrets, and how to apply them in our situation. Secret 1 is that it takes 3. It takes God, it takes you, and it takes your spouse. And why focusing on our part can shift everything. Secret 2, how awareness empowers ownership. Our awareness empowers our willingness to take a step and start to move. And how awareness and ownership unlock the will to heal. And why most people skip this step. And then secret 3 is the mindset foundation. And why mindset is the foundation everything else is built upon. And then I'll show you how to take the next step if you would like a more personalized support in applying these 3 to your situation. Now, I know that you've tried a lot. Maybe you've done couples counseling before, and it helped for a few weeks. You felt motivated, energized, and hopeful, and then you slid back. Maybe you read the books, attended the conferences, renewed your vows, and prayed for shift and change. But that never came. And after each attempt, it ushered in doubt. That doubt empowered us to ask, what is wrong with us? We understand this pattern of hope and disappointment all too well. That we try a new approach because something has to give. We have to do something different. We try new therapy, a new therapist, a new approach, a new modality, a new technique, new tools. In the moment that we start applying them, there is temporary hope. We start to see the needle move a little bit. And because of time and because of unprocessed pain, those old patterns resurface and lead us back to where we've been. And so as you're sitting there evaluating, you've probably tried some formation of traditional counseling that taught you communication techniques without addressing the deeper pain. Maybe you read the self-help books that gave foundation and information, but no opportunity for application and implementation. Maybe pastoral guidance that affirmed your faith, but focused on symptoms rather than root causes. Maybe we tried prayer and disciplines that brought peace, maybe even temporary peace, but did not establish the relational shift and dynamics where connection could be possible. Maybe we just avoided everything altogether and we put our attention and focus on work, on our kids, on church activities, on anything and everything to distract us and numb us from the pain of what we were experiencing from our disconnection. And if you sit here today, you probably are experiencing some form of skepticism. And I want you to know that makes sense. Every time that you read a new book, every time that you engaged in a new technique, a new tool, a new therapist, a new conference, whatever it was, you invested time. You invested money and hope and emotional energy into the solutions that were being taught that did not deliver. And so you may be asking yourself, if those didn't deliver, then why would this process be any different? Now, as you're asking those, I'm not going to ask you to push your skepticism to the side. I'm going to ask you to actually utilize that skepticism as I continue to show you something that addresses it directly. Because until you understand why those past approaches did not work, it will make it almost impossible to know whether or not this one can work and do something for you. As we get going, I want you to know the journey that I've been on and why I do this and why I'm so passionate to stand before you today as you watch this. 19 years ago, I did not set out to become a marriage counselor. I set out to be a counselor. I was building the career. I was checking the boxes, and I was trying to be successful by every measure possible. And I feel like I was actually moving the needle, but I didn't know that there was something going on beneath the surface that would not allow me to ignore it. My wife developed a severe autoimmune condition. I had just lost a job. We had just lost a house. We were getting ready to move in with family, and we were grateful that our family allowed us to move in with them. It's not what we believed life would have for us. And so we experienced pain in that moment. And that pain was impacting my wife's body more than I understood. And as I sat there and watched her, I felt completely powerless. I was supposed to be the one that protected her. I vowed that I would stand and make sure nothing of harm would come her way, and yet it was happening on my watch, and I couldn't do anything about it. And I felt helpless. I felt completely powerless. I felt fear. I felt shame. I felt guilt. I felt all those feelings as I watched my wife's body turn against her, the person that I loved the most. Something broke me in that season. I realized that the stress, the emotional patterns, and that pain, the pain that we both were carrying was impacting how we connected. It was impacting our relationship as it continued to impact her body, and not only that, but my body. And during that time, crying out to God, asking for an answer, needing help in shifting our relationship to see my wife's body recover, to see my body recover, I learned 3 things. God gave me 3 things to focus on. That pain must be addressed. Every strategy that I used was not working because I was going after the symptoms. Those strategies to manage or to suppress the wounds was actually empowering them and keeping them alive. The second thing I discovered was that God partners in healing, not as a distant observer, but as an active participant when we call on his name and when we invite him into the process and into our pain. And then the third thing is that the body reveals truth. Our bodies can't lie to ourselves. The body can't lie to itself. It needs the mind to do that. And the symptoms are messengers. They're attempting to get our attention, and that they are not problems, and they do not need to be silenced. Those 3 discoveries transformed how I thought about what we were walking through during that season. It transformed our marriage. It transformed my wife's health, and it transformed my understanding of how to lean into this process and to sit across from people and help them. I stopped running from the process and I leaned into it and accepted that this was my life's work. To sit across from hurting couples and helping them heal at the very root. It was my purpose. And pneuma, I spell it N-U-M-A. It's actually, which in Greek means the breath. And according to the book of John, as Jesus breathed on the disciples, they were able to receive the Holy Spirit. That's why the practice is called this, is understanding that God is not just a technique. He is the foundation and the source of everything that we do. And Pneuma, my private practice, was born from that place of darkness where God introduced light and empowered vulnerability and radical faith to help individuals just like he helped us. I needed you to know that I am not just teaching philosophy or theory. Everything that I'm going to share with you today comes from walking through my own darkness, from sitting with countless couples and seeing how helpless they felt, how they felt stuck, just as you may be feeling stuck right now. You're not stuck. You're not broken. And your marriage is not too far gone. As we approach the 3 and understanding that we are carrying pain, unprocessed pain that needs to be healed and released so it creates the capacity for connection. See, what I discovered through my own personal journey, and as I continue to refine the practice, is this very framework that bridges us from pain to resolve. And we have to understand that it's not learning new communication skills, even though communication is necessary. It's not about trying harder. It's not about trying harder or even praying more, even though prayer is needed. It's about healing the emotional container and the mental container so that those containers can actually hold the intimacy that you have been longing for. Most approaches approach their process from addressing the symptoms, the arguments, the disconnection, the distance, the lack of intimacy. And they go about those directly. And because of that, it is equivalent to putting a fresh paint of house with tremendous foundational problems. Even though the optics may look better and the optics look stronger, it's temporary because it's a matter of time before those cracks keep revealing what the fresh paint tried to hide. And why do those old ways have the opportunity to failing? Is because these approaches fail because of something that is simple yet overlooked. We cannot build intimacy on the foundation of unprocessed pain. We need to go after the pain. And when emotional wounds go unhealed, our nervous system is there to stay in protective mode, which perceives vulnerability and transparency as a threat. So every time that you attempt to move closer to your spouse through vulnerability, a biological response happens to pull you back. And it's not because you do not want connection. It's because your body is attempting to protect you and keep you safe from the pain it remembers. So here is the shift that changes everything. The biggest issue in our marriage has nothing to do with behavior. The biggest problem in your marriage isn't behavior. It isn't communication. And it's not even about the specific issues that you argue. The biggest issue is unresolved emotional pain. And it has been running the show ever since pain was introduced into your body. Until that pain gets addressed, every strategy that we approach is just managing the symptoms. And what I offer is different. It's different from those traditional therapeutic approaches that just go after symptoms, or coaching programs that go after symptoms. Because I do not believe that it's about managing symptoms. It's about how do we restore, how do we create restoration at the very root. And at the root, if there's pain, we need to address the pain and process it and get it out to create capacity. Capacity for something that we so deeply long for, connection and intimacy. I like to call it the emotional capacity restoration model. A faith-integrated approach that heals the wounds that has been blocking your connection. I call it emotional capacity restoration. A faith-integrated approach that heals the wounds blocking connection so that your marriage has the capacity to hold the intimacy that it was always designed for. Emotional capacity is your ability to stay present, engaged, and connected when things get difficult. High capacity empowers us to navigate conflict without shutting down. It empowers us to be vulnerable and transparent without feeling unsafe, and receiving love without deflecting it, so that our nervous system doesn't create a biological response to block the very thing that we so desperately want. When there's low capacity, it enables us to react, to withdraw, and to defend. We don't do these things because we're a bad spouse. It's because our emotional container is running without capacity. So here is the progression of the model: aware, own, invite, release, renew, and bless. We want to be aware of the pains and patterns beneath the surface. We want to acknowledge those. As we become aware of those, we can engage our will to own those. And as we own, we want to own our part. We want to own our patterns, the ways and the pains that are, and the pain that is in. We want to be aware of the pain and patterns beneath the surface. Be aware of what we're feeling, what we're thinking, and what we're telling ourselves. what we need and what we want. As we're aware, we can engage our will to own our part without taking all the blame, so that we can invite God into those unhealed wounds. As his beauty comes in, we can allow the space so that as his beauty comes in, we can release the ashes of the pain. Invite and release those old patterns that aren't doing anything for you other than keeping you in a place that's causing more negative impact. Then we want to renew our minds into the places of possibility, into the words and promises that Jesus has spoken over us. We want to renew our beliefs. What do we believe about ourselves? What do we believe about our marriage and about our spouse? Our identity, who he says that we are, and walk in that and have a transformed way in our mindset. And then bless our marriage, bless ourselves, bless our spouse, coming back into alignment with action and wholeness. Because this process is about putting attention and focus on us so that we can process the pain. And what that does is it empowers us. It empowers us to take a step, because this process isn't about focusing on your spouse. It's not about fixing your marriage by fixing your spouse. If they would stop doing this and start doing that, if they would stop saying this and start saying that, and yes, those things can be impactful. It's about healing the wounds that have been blocking your capacity for that connection, which creates space for everything to shift. When you restore emotional capacity, you are not trying to force intimacy and connection through willpower. You're creating the space and the internal conditions where intimacy can thrive. And so as we go back through in practical application, it takes three. It's God, the foundation, you and your spouse. This isn't a formula. It's a recognition of how genuine transformation takes place in faith-driven marriages. Us being willing to acknowledge and own our part, starting to lean into the process and engaging and processing unresolved pain. And it creates space and a hope that your spouse will eventually engage in their journey. And you and your spouse being anchored to the source of hope, the source of love, and the source of connection when things get difficult. Healing is not a solo project. And it's not something that we can force on our spouse. It's our willingness to do our part, our work. And what that can create is the opportunity and space for your spouse to eventually engage their own journey. As you continue to lean into this process and introspectively look at any unprocessed pain to process that, it's going to create space. And how will your spouse observe this process going on in you? And what will that empower in them? And God's presence as the anchor, as the foundation, as the source of all things, knowing that he wants your marriage to thrive. All three parts are necessary and needed, and none of them can be skipped because each part matters. Most couples approach marriage by focusing on what their spouse needs to change, what they are doing or not doing, what they're saying or not saying. And their focus goes externally instead of looking internally and saying, hey, where are the places that I can grow? How do I become empowered to lean in to see where unprocessed pain dwells within me and start to work on myself to create the possibility of your spouse to lean into the process? Sometimes those couples wait for their spouse to be ready. And how long will that be? How long will you have to wait? Here's an opportunity for you to choose you, because transformation rarely begins when both partners are equally motivated. Our desire may be that their motivation is at the same place of yours. And if it's not, we can feel helpless, we can feel powerless, or we can feel powerful and helpful by choosing for us to go first. Because more often than not, it starts with one person who decides, I'm going to do my part, regardless of what they choose to do. When you focus on your part, your pain, patterns, and response, something powerful happens inside you. When we stop trying to control what we know we can't control, we have the opportunity of reclaiming agency over our own healing, which creates the space for your spouse to begin their own journey. And you may be asking, why do I have to go first? Makes sense and a logical question. How long do we wait to see change? And if you're aware that change needs to be had, there's the opportunity to lean in and go first. And none of this takes place because you are manipulating your spouse into it, but because you are empowering the opportunity for change. And change people, change atmospheres. As we acknowledge God into this process, we understand that He is not just a nice addition to this healing process. For people of faith that believe in Him, it is the foundation that our marriage stands on. God designed marriage. He designed us to connect. And He partners in restoration when we invite Him into the process, calling on His name, inviting Him into the pain, inviting Him into your marriage, inviting Him into the process to believe and lean in and going first. Because this isn't about performing spirituality or adding prayer as a nice technique. It's about understanding that He is the foundation. It's about anchoring our hope into something bigger than the current pain that you're experiencing. So what does this look like practically? I'm going to encourage you to start asking 2 questions each day. I want you to be empowered by asking these 2 questions. Question 1, what pain am I carrying that I haven't acknowledged? And then question 2, what is God inviting me into own? What is God inviting me to own in this situation? 2 powerful questions. And these 2 questions are a simple practice that empower us to shift from victim to agent, from waiting to working, and we can choose that today. I know some of you may be thinking, Brady, if I do all this work, what if my spouse never engages? What if nothing changes? What does that mean for my marriage? Here's the truth. You cannot control your spouse's journey. However, you can create the condition where change becomes possible. And even worst case scenario, if your marriage doesn't transform the way that you hoped, you yourself will be transformed. And you matter, and that matters. So in summary, the first secret is recognizing that healing requires 3: God's goodness, yourself, and your spouse. And it begins with you taking ownership of your part, leaning in and saying, I'm not going to wait. I'm not going to blame, and I'm not going to control. I'm just going to acknowledge and own the work that is yours to acknowledge and to start moving forward. Secret 2, that we cannot change what we will not acknowledge. Awareness and ownership are the pathways to transformation. Without them, everything, even the strategies that we express, stay surface level. Most couples repeat these same cycles for years, sometimes for decades, because they're unaware of what's actually driving their behavior. Now, they may be aware of that they react in conflict, withdrawal when they're hurt, but they don't see the invisible wounds underneath those reactions. And what you can't see, you cannot heal. When you develop awareness, you will start to notice patterns. You'll start to see specific triggers, those moments that send you in defensive mode. Those old wounds get activated in present conflicts. And those core beliefs about yourself and about your spouse that shape how we see everything and how we interact. Awareness doesn't fix these things instantaneously, but it gives us something to start working on that starts to turn the ship. Ownership is the companion to awareness. We become aware to own, to empower our willingness, to take responsibility for our emotions, thoughts, reactions, and patterns, while not taking responsibility for everything that is wrong. Ownership is not blame. It's agency. It's saying, this is my part. I can address this. I do not need to wait for anybody to go first. I will lean in and go first. Now, here's a tool that impacts both awareness and ownership so that you can lean in and actually start addressing any unprocessed pain today. It's what I like to call a 30-day emotional inventory. Each day notes the moments that you withdrew, that you blamed, that you defended or shut down. Now, as you are doing this, I'm going to invite you to observe those patterns, not to judge you. And what you'll see as you're evaluating those areas and also looking at how you're feeling and what you're thinking, what you're telling yourself, what you need and what you want, you'll start to notice patterns that you never noticed before. And like we say, patterns that are seen are patterns that you can change. Now, this is where I get objective from time to time. And the objective that comes up is, but I've been self-aware for years. I know that I have issues. Knowing has not helped. There is intellectual awareness, and then there is embodied awareness. That intellectual awareness understands your patterns conceptually. Whereas embodied awareness is feeling what's happening in real time. Acknowledging them, acknowledging the emotions, and owning them in the moment. And what we find is a lot of individuals have the first kind, what's necessary and needed. The second secret is that awareness and ownership unlock our will to change. That we cannot transform what we will not acknowledge. But when you see clearly, honestly, transparently, then healing becomes possible. And secret 3, that mindset is the foundation that everything else is built on. Whether you believe you can heal or whether you believe that you can't, you're right. And what is it that you want to be right about? Your mindset empowers and shapes every choice that we do in our marriage. Right now, if you believe that you're stuck, it will interpret every setback as confirmation that you're stuck. However, if you believe that change is possible, it will interpret every setback as part of the process. Same circumstances with completely different trajectories. What trajectory do you want to be on? For faith-driven couples, our mindset is deeply interwoven into our identity, who we are in Christ. And we understand through Scripture that we are loved, we are worthy, we are capable of growth, regardless of what our track record would try to communicate. And not only that, but as we lean in and accept our identity in Christ, we have the ability to approach challenges from a completely different place. Because we're not striving to prove that we're enough, we're actually resting in the truth that Christ already says that we are. Do we believe it? The shift that unlocks everything. Shift us from we've always been this way to we can learn a new way. From nothing has worked before to we haven't tried this approach before. From I'm too broken to I have the capacity for healing. I just need the right support. This isn't positive thinking. It's aligned thinking. Bringing your beliefs into alignment of what God already says and what is actually possible. Now let's make this personal. Let me show you how these 3 secrets show up in real life. I want to do a quick assessment, and as I communicate these questions, I want you to notice if 2 or more of these patterns sound familiar. You love your spouse, but you feel more like roommates than partners. You avoid certain topics because you know they'll only escalate into fights. You feel exhausted by the relationship, even though you're not really sure why. You've told yourself, this is just how we are, so that you can lower your expectations. You sometimes wonder if you married the wrong person, even though you deeply love them. Now, if you've recognized yourself in 2 or more of those statements, here's what this indicates. Those are not signs of a bad marriage or incompatibility. It's actually a sign of depleted emotional capacity. And because your emotional capacity is depleted, your nervous system has been in protective mode for so long that connection feels threatening instead of natural. That the pain that's been at the very core has never been addressed. So your body continues creating distance to empower you to be safe. Now, I need you to hear this. This can be seen as good news. This is good news. Because it means that you're not fundamentally broken, that your marriage is not beyond repair, and that you do not need to be a different person or to find a different spouse. You need to heal the pain that's been blocking your capacity for connection. And when that heals, everything shifts. And this is exactly what we evaluate in the 30,000-foot view clarity consultation. Where is your emotional capacity depleted? What patterns are running beneath your awareness? What sequence would restore your connection most effectively? Because the right support in the wrong order will leave you stuck. However, the right sequence, tailored to your specific situation, empowers change that can actually create lasting change. So why can you trust this? Sounds good, but how do I know it actually works? How will I know that it works for me? Let me show you what I've witnessed over the past 19 years. A couple that had been married for 18 years came in feeling like strangers. They were disconnected. The intimacy felt broken. And they actually had gone through counseling twice. They knew the communication strengths and the styles and how to apply them, but nothing was changing. When we worked through the emotional capacity restorational process, they discovered both were carrying childhood wounds that got activated in every conflict. Neither one of them had ever named or processed this pain. And as they journeyed through the restorational process, within months, they went from dreading time to one another to actually enjoying time and each other once again. Another example was an individual came to me communicating that he didn't think that he'd ever be close to his wife again. He felt guarded, skeptical, and he had literally tried everything. And in that, we started with daily emotional inventory as well as mindset work. Gradually, as he started to apply the tools, he started to begin patterns that he had never noticed before. He started to notice his own reactions and the ways that he had always blamed his wife. Today, he leads his home with presence. He leads his home with intentionality. He initiates connection instead of avoiding it in the past. And if he was here today, he'd tell you the man he was before feels like a completely different person because he leaned in, challenged his beliefs, acknowledged his part, didn't wait, processed the pain, became aware of what was dwelling within him so that he could do something differently. I've had the honor to walk with couples through their darkest seasons. In the past 19 years, this is the calling. And if I could say I have a superpower, it is helping people see what they missed. Helping people validate themselves and their story, as well as showing them a path forward when they had stopped believing that one exists or one was possible. I don't promise that your marriage will be transformed overnight. I wish I could. But I do promise that when we address the real root, lasting change becomes possible. So to recap, secret one, it takes all three: the goodness of God, yourself, and your spouse. And transformation begins when you take ownership of your part. Secret two, that awareness and ownership unlock the will to heal. That you can't change what you will not acknowledge. And secret three, mindset is the foundation for everything. Whether you believe change is possible, shapes everything that follows. And together, these three secrets form the foundation of emotional capacity restoration, which is the framework for healing marriages at the very root. Now, here's the reality. What we cover today is the framework. It has the opportunity of impacting your situation. It is the why behind lasting transformation. But every marriage is different. Your specific patterns, wounds, and dynamics are unique to you and your situation. Applying this framework requires understanding your situation. This is why I created the 30,000-foot view clarity consultation. It is a focused session where we evaluate your patterns, identify what's been blocking connection, and mapping a sequence that would create change for you and your marriage. When you book the 30,000-foot view clarity consultation for just $67, here's what you receive: the consultation itself, a focused, personalized session where we look at your marriage from a 30,000-foot view and identify where emotional capacity has been depleted. You get an emotional capacity assessment, a structured evaluation that reveals your specific patterns, your specific triggers, and root wounds driving disconnection, as well as you get a personalized restoration roadmap, a clear and concise step-by-step map showing which areas need attention first and in what sequence, tailored to you and your marriage, as well as a marriage reset quick start guide. a practical resource you can begin using immediately. In this resource, it has daily practices that build awareness through ownership as it moves you through the restorational process. This guide has empowered so many individuals and couples to begin shifting patterns before we even begin to meet. This isn't endless talk therapy that goes nowhere. It's not generic advice that you could get from a book. It is a focused evaluation with a clear outcome. You'll leave knowing exactly what's been blocking your connection and in what sequence will restore it. And what we've seen is even one session can shift the direction of your marriage. For $67, the 30,000-foot view clarity consultation, which is less than most couples spend out on dinner. That clarity that could transform your marriage for $67. Now, how to book. Click on the button below to schedule your consultation. You will choose a time that works for you, complete a brief intake so that I can prepare for our session, and then we'll connect on your date and time for your 30,000-foot view. If you don't leave the consultation with clear insight into what's blocking your connection, as well as what to do about it, I'll even refund your investment completely. If you don't feel the session was worth every penny of your $67, tell me and I will make it right. I offer these because I have a passion and I know what happens when couples get clarity about the real root of their struggles. It empowers and it changes everything. Here's something I want you to consider as you are thinking about your consultation. Every week, you stay in the same patterns. Those patterns get reinforced. The distance grows slightly wider, and the resentment builds slightly higher, and the walls get slightly thicker. Change is always easier today than it will be tomorrow. Now, as you hear that, I don't want you to hear that through the filter of pressure. I'm saying that because it's true and because I've watched countless couples wait longer than they ever should have. And what would it look like for you to lean in and take that step today? And now, before we close, let me ask you a couple things. Can you now see why communication techniques alone haven't created the lasting change that you need and desire? Does it make sense that healing the pain underneath the patterns is what creates lasting change? Lastly, can you feel how different your marriage could be if you restored emotional capacity that could actually hold the intimacy that you desire? You're not stuck. You're not too far gone. You're not destined to live as roommates. You're carrying pain that needs to be healed. And when it heals, connection becomes possible. The 30,000-foot view clarity consultation is your next step. Clear insight, a personalized roadmap, and the beginning of real transformation. Schedule yours now. I'm looking forward to helping you and showing you the path back to what your marriage has always been destined for.